Okay.
Well, good night for all the viewers of the Yaron Brook's channel. We'd like to introduce ourselves. My name is Matheus Passini. I'm here with Ricardo Birk as well. We are from Objetivismo. Good night for all the viewers of the Yaron Brook's channel.
Oops, sorry, we had an echo there. Go ahead.
Again, my name is Matheus Passini, and I'm here with Ricardo Birk. We are from Objetivismo Brasil, and we are today interviewing Yaron Brook with some questions we got from our readers. And so if you like, Ricardo, you can start.
All right. So hi, Yaron. It's nice to see you again.
Hey, Ricardo.
Last time, and perhaps the first time and only time we spoke, was in Latin America, so in Argentina and in Brazil. It's good that you'll come back in a few months so we can chat again in person.
Yep.
But we want to produce this episode, which later on we'll translate to Portuguese so that the broad Brazilian population can understand it in case they don't speak English. So then our first question is, we just want to get your story of how you got to know Rand's ideas and what motivated you to continue studying objectivism for like over 3 decades.
Sure. So I grew up in Israel, and as I think most kids and most teenagers in Israel in the 1970s, I was a dedicated socialist. I think everybody was in those days in Israel, and a real collectivist. A friend of mine, I was talking to a friend, and he was spouting these capitalist ideas, and I said, where are you getting this nonsense from? Where's this coming from? This isn't, I've never heard anything like this. This is ridiculous. And he said, you got to read this book. And he handed me a copy of Atlas Shrugged. And so I read it. It was a good friend, and I respected him, and I read the book. And it took me a long time because Ayn Rand was basically challenging everything I believed in. She was questioning all the assumptions I had taken for granted. I like to say I argued with Ayn Rand. I yelled at Ayn Rand. I threw her book on the wall. And by the end of reading Atlas Shrugged, I was convinced that she was right and everything I'd been taught was wrong. And more than anything, I think the thing that really stuck with me in Atlas Shrugged was the idea that was really revolutionary to me, that one should live for oneself, that one should live, the purpose of one's life is happiness and in one's own well-being, and to live the best life that you can for you. I'd always been taught sacrifice. I would always be taught that the purpose of life is to sacrifice for others, for the state, for the collective, for the Jewish people, for whatever. And I bought into it, and I didn't know there was an alternative. And suddenly, Ayn Rand's, I think, ethics opened up the world to me. It opened up opportunities and possibilities that I couldn't imagine. And because it was so revolutionary, because I could see that it had this amazing impact on how I was going to live and how I should live, I started reading Ayn Rand. I basically started picking up all her books, and Fountainhead and the nonfiction. And in those days, it was very difficult to get the books. I mean, this is pre-internet, so and Israel was kind of still a backwater. So anytime my father would go to America, I would send him to bookstores to bring me Ayn Rand books, and which he didn't like because he didn't like the books, and he didn't like the fact that the booksellers would always look at him funny because he was buying Ayn Rand books. But he got me the books. I picked up books in secondhand bookstores, and basically started studying her ideas. And the more I studied, the more committed I got, the more it was clear that this was a philosophy for living, a philosophy that I could really build a life around, and that was the philosophy that would benefit my life. And over the years, I became more and more serious about studying it, and ultimately became obviously a professional intellectual in her ideas.
Yeah. So how do you think her ideas influenced you into later on moving to the US?
Well, I mean, they influenced every aspect of my life. I mean, certainly they influenced my move to the US. When I finished Atlas Shrugged, it was clear to me that there was no reason to stay in Israel, that Israel was an accident of birth, and that given that you only had one life, and given that you needed to pursue happiness, that the real challenge was to figure out where the best place on planet Earth to live was, and to go there. That is, to live the best life that you could in the best place possible, where you had the most opportunities to live the best life. And it was, and looking at the world and looking at what countries were out there, and which countries were free and which were not. And it was pretty clear that the US was the place I wanted to go to. So, it took me a while to get here. It took about 10 years from when I first read Atlas Shrugged until I actually moved to the US. But it was clear to me when I moved that I wasn't going back, and that this is where I wanted to live my life, and that at heart and in spirit, I was an American, in many ways, more so than many Americans are. But it influenced every aspect of my life. It influenced the way I approached my career, the way I approached, romantic life, the way I approached my studies, the way I approached just life in general, friendships, everything. Because it was, it shapes everything you do. If you understand her ideas, if you don't take Atlas Shrugged just as a political book, but as a book about life, a book about morality, a book about philosophy, then you realize that it's a revolutionary book that has the potential to guide every aspect of your life moving forward. So it very, very powerful, and shaped everything about my life since then.
So later on in life, in the 90s and the early 2000s, as you became an intellectual, public intellectual, one of the main jobs you've had is to motivate people into, going about and then picking up Atlas Shrugged and other books by Ayn Rand and reading them. So what do you think are some of the challenges you face in trying to motivate the audience, to, especially the newcomers, right? Like they attended the conference, to pick up the books? And do you think there are differences between, let's say, the region? So if you're talking to people in the US or in Latin America or Europe?
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest challenge is the same challenge that I faced when I first read Ayn Rand, and that is that everything you've learned, everything around you is opposed to these ideas, and that society is going to come after you. They're going to argue with you. They're going to debate you. They're going to be hostile to you because you hold these ideas. So it requires a real independence of thought, a certain strength in one's own conviction to hold these ideas and sustain them. So you go in front of students and you talk about capitalism, and all students everywhere in the world, I've spoken about this even in China. In China, it's the same way. They all have the same Keynesian, altruistic kind of point of view when looking at economics and looking at capitalism and looking at socialism. It's not that they're socialists, it's that they're not capitalists. And they're statists of one form or another. And you just have to keep knocking down the same objections that everybody has, because every professor in the world teaches the same garbage, the same wrong ideas. And then when you get into philosophy, when you get into the ethics, the challenge, of course, is they've grown up, particularly in America and in Latin America, they've grown up with Christianity, they've grown up with altruism, they've grown up with Jesus on a cross dying for their sins. And now I'm telling them they should live their life for themselves in pursuit of their own happiness. And that is a shock, and it's very hard for them to accept. And they think that means, the initial response, they think that means treating other people really, really badly and being horrible to other people. And so it takes a while to explain that. So the real challenge is undoing all the bad stuff that they have. And then, of course, motivating them to read a big, thick book like Atlas Shrugged, 1,100 pages, in a world in which young people don't read, period. They just don't read, never mind a big book. So it's not TikTok. You can't condense Atlas Shrugged into a TikTok video. And so those, I think, are the biggest challenges, is fighting the existing philosophy, the existing viewpoints and then getting people to read. And you're not going to change people's mind about philosophy without them reading Ayn Rand. They're going to have to ultimately read, whether it's Atlas Shrugged or whether it's her nonfiction books. I know in Portuguese you have now The Virtue of Selfishness, and you have some other books, nonfiction by Ayn Rand in Portuguese. You know, these are must reads. You're not going to understand the ideas unless you actually study the ideas. Philosophy it's deep. And again, you have to undo all the things that you've been taught, and it's work, and people have to engage in that work. In terms of the differences in regions, you know, there's a sense in which the Americans, it's easiest because there's a certain part of America that connects to Ayn Rand. There's a certain sense of life. There's a certain tradition, if you will, of the founding fathers, of liberty, of freedom, of a pro-capitalist attitude. So there's some, but then at the same time, America is quite religious, and that's very difficult to overcome. So I find it hard in America. I think you get traction, but it's not easy given how big the country is. My experience in Latin America, particularly in Brazil, has been quite positive. So the challenges in Latin America, primarily two challenges. One is Catholicism, and the other is what I call continental philosophy. The fact that there is none of the ideas of individual rights and the ideas of pursuit of happiness. You know, you're very much influenced by German Romantic philosophy and really nothing else. But there's also massive frustration in Latin America. Young people know things are wrong, things are bad, things haven't worked. And for decades, you've tried all kinds of things and all kinds of different regimes and all kinds of different statist tinkering, and nothing works. So at least there seems to be a certain percentage of people who are open kind of to radical, new, controversial ideas, because what the hell, nothing else has worked. So why not try something new? So in that respect, I think I've always found Brazil very positive and very open, and audiences engaged and interested. I think it's true to some extent in the rest of Latin America, but it's an uphill battle everywhere. And then in Europe is difficult because Europe is not one place, right? Europe is very, very different. Places in Europe are very, very different. You know, Eastern Europe has the experience of communism. Again, young people, I think, are more willing to be radical, more willing to think outside the box, more willing to reject communism offhand. You know, Ukraine, which of course now is in the headlines because of the war. In Ukraine in 2015, Atlas Shrugged was the best-selling book in the country. And people were very engaged and people were very interested. In places like Poland and other places like that, people, I think, are interested and engaged because of the memory of communism. In Central and Southern Europe, almost no interest. Life is good, and they're very collectivistic, and they're very just cynical, and they're very, you know, why think radical? Life is too good. Why be radical? Why shake things up? I mean, everything's very comfortable, like in Scandinavia and North. Now it's interesting. Scandinavia, there's interest in Ayn Rand, and then in Great Britain, there's a lot of interest in Ayn Rand. But it is true that young people in those countries are comfortable. And, you know, I think there's more energy in Latin America and in Eastern Europe than there is in the West.
Yeah, so out of curiosity, so you said that, you know, there's a difficulty in getting people to read, especially young people, like an 1,100-page book. Do you ever recommend the audiobook version? Because, you know, that's, at least in my experience, I mean, I've listened to all the audiobooks.
Yeah.
That's an easier way to get people to do something because you can see the number of hours, right? So
probably, like, I don't think I have, but yes. I mean, I don't know how much young people listen to particularly fiction books. I just don't know. But yeah, it certainly is another way to reach people and another avenue, another possibility.
Yeah. So switching a little bit to objectivism in the way,
sure.
You know, given the fact that it's very difficult to understand objectivism due to the, you know, it's an integrated philosophy, and there's a lot of stuff to study. And oftentimes people don't realize how much stuff there is, as we say, pre-OAC, right? I mean, I heard this from you and other people, that you don't know what you don't know unless you go through the OAC.
Yep.
I'm in year 3 now, so I totally get that now. So what are some of the common ways you see people misapplying objectivism?
I mean, I think some of them are, political. They associate objectivism with some kind of conservatism, or they can, since they can only, people seem to have this tendency to think only in dualities, left and right. So if you're not left, and objectivism is clearly not left, then you must be right. And then when you say, but we're not, right, we don't agree with the right on X, Y, and Z, then they don't know what to do with it. They're completely confused, and they're completely out of it. So that's one. So certainly in politics, you see a lot of people being confused, and a lot of people, aligning themselves with a set of ideas that is not objectivist. In ethics, I think that they take some kind of superficial view of what self-interest is. They know it's not exploiting other people. They know it's not lying, cheating, and stealing, but then they don't do the work to really integrate the ideas into them. So they kind of drift a little bit, and they don't fully integrate it, and they don't live a fully integrated life. I mean, one of the challenges it goes back to challenges, is we live in a world where the dominant philosophies are all disintegrating. They're all emphasizing disintegration, not integration. It's very hard for people to get that they've got to do the work, right? Ethics is supposed to come natural. It's supposed to be an instinct. It's supposed to be just there. You read a book, you read an essay, you're done. 7 virtues, I'll follow the virtues. But it requires constant integration. And then, of course, at the core of all of that is an epistemology that is hard. And that really is the reason why they get confused in politics and in ethics, is that to really understand the concepts and to really understand the ideas, you have to have a solid understanding of how, in a sense, concepts are formed, and how to deal with concept, and how the conceptual faculty deals with ideas, and what integration means, and why integration is so important, which, having been in the OAC, I'm sure you understand. But integration, I mean, who talks about integration in the world out there except objectivists? I mean, things are not related, things are not integrated. So people see the world as a disintegrated thing, and then they have to latch on to, I have to have an opinion about this, but I don't know how to integrate it with the rest of my knowledge. So I'm just going to have an opinion based on some similarity with other opinions. And it's a mess, and it's a cognitive mess. So what you mainly see among objectivists is, I'd say, cognitive confusion about morality and about the applications, which is morality in politics. I think the other thing I'd say is objectivists dismiss aesthetics way too much. They don't pay enough attention to it. Obviously, for Ayn Rand, this was crucial, and there's a whole branch in philosophy, and for her, it was very, very important for the good life, to live a good life. So I think those are the main kind of confusions, challenges, problems, how to really apply these ideas in your day-to-day life and think about them properly. Think about the abstract concept properly. There's, as Leonard Peikoff has talked about, there's a tendency among a lot of objectivists to be rationalistic, to hold objectivism as kind of floating abstractions, not to link it to the actual concretes in reality, actual examples, and then because of that, it's very hard to apply them. Some people have the opposite tendency, which is empiricism. All they have is reality, but they don't know quite how to connect that reality to the abstract concept that they think they know. So all of that is a challenge. So the basic challenge is a challenge of thinking well, and that requires real study. And Ayn Rand, of course, has a book, which I don't think is in Portuguese, The Introduction to Objectivist Epistemology, which at the end of the day is kind of the core and the heart of objectivism, because if everything centers in objectivism around reason and rationality and thinking, well, then you better know how to do it. And epistemology is really the core of how you do that. But you do have, I think you have, do you still have OPA, Objectivism, Philosophy of Ayn Rand in Portuguese? Is it still in print? Oh, good.
Well,
So you,
in print,
No,
but you can get it
no,
in
in print, no.
okay.
You can find it. But
We should probably work on getting it in print, but back in print, but it's, you've got some really valuable chapters there in epistemology that are really crucial to getting in. Of course, it's a fantastic book in a sense that it gives this complete integrated complete integrated presentation of objectivism, of the philosophy, core philosophy. And I think anybody who's serious about these ideas should definitely read what we call OPA, Objectivism, the Philosophy of Ayn Rand by Leonard Peikoff.
Continue on the same on kind of a same question, but as you know, here in Brazil, for example, we have a big community that likes the Austrian School of Economics, and I would like you to comment on George Reisman. He had a really great book. He wrote a great book called Capitalism, where he tried to integrate the ideas of objectivism into the Austrian School of Economics. And as a follow-up question, why is it so difficult to see people applying applying objectivism to other areas aside of philosophy? Because you see that over the years, many people finished the OC, but they were not. You don't hear about them anymore. You don't see how they apply the knowledge they got outside the OC to their lives as a whole.
So I don't agree with that. I think they're out there and they're quite evident. I mean, look at Alex Epstein. Look at the work he's doing on energy and on fossil fuels and on climate change, and he's very visible. But look, and maybe the most important thing that we have is the higher ground education, which is the school or network of schools, the largest Montessori network in the United States or in the world, maybe. And it's all run by OAC graduates, right? And it's like, I don't know, there are 10 of them working there or something like that. And then there are others who are in other educational ventures or in other different parts of the educational. So people are doing really good and important work applying objectivism, particularly in education, probably the most important field in which we need to apply it. So I think it's happening, but you have to have scale, and to get to the kind of cultural visibility that we all would like. We have to have thousands of graduates in order to get a few dozen who are going to be big celebrities. But I think given the number of graduates we've had, which is more in the hundreds than in the tens of thousands, I think we're doing quite well in a sense of the visibility and the number. And remember, a lot of the OEC graduates internally focused. That is, a lot of the focus is on using them to teach new OEC students, at least for now, because we're still growing. And again, it's a numbers game. But you've got a number of people out there applying these ideas to various fields. We haven't had anybody applying it consistently to economics, and that's a real shame. We've got Rob Tarr, who doesn't publish a lot and is not very active. I wish he was more active, but he's probably the most knowledgeable in terms of bridging Austrian economics with objectivism. Look, George Reisman is brilliant, and he knows economics. The book is it's a massive book. It's an encyclopedia. I don't think it's very well written, but it's got immense amount of knowledge in it. It's definitely an attempt to try to integrate objectivism into Austrian economics. Unfortunately, I think he makes some errors when it comes to that integration. This goes back to some of the issues about understanding objectivism. His main error is the accepts kind of von Mises's methodology, which is very rationalistic. He accepts a kind of methodology that is a little detached from reality. So he's rationalistic in the way he presents it. And I think a lot of the, is what, so, but I think overall, he's the only person we have who is an economist and is an Austrian economist and an objectivist who's written significantly on it. So I think as a consequence of accepting the bad methodology, there are significant errors in the book, but that shouldn't dismiss, we shouldn't dismiss the book because of that, because I think there's a lot of value in it. And also I'd say that there is a lot of work to be done, right? I think Austrian economics is basically the right economic theory. And I think that we need people who, I think, unfortunately, many of the modern Austrian economists have been seduced by Marie Rothbard and by moral subjectivism and by anarchism and by a lot of bad ideas. But behind it all is a solid foundation in economics. And I think what we need to do is we need to work on a proper philosophical foundation for Austrian economics and to show how Austrian economics integrates well with objectivism. Again, Rob Tarr has done some work on that, showing that the subjective value that people like Mises and Menger, but primarily Mises talked about, is consistent with Rand's view of objective value, that the two are very similar concepts, that they don't contradict with one another. But there's got to be a lot more of that going on. It's good that people are interested in Austrian economics in the sense that it's good economics, it's right economics. It's unfortunate that with the Austrian economics that they pick up a bad philosophy. And that is the philosophy that is behind anarchy, the philosophy that tends to be a subjectivist philosophy, or they try to hold on to whatever philosophy they've always had, religion or a Kantian philosophy, or whatever the philosophy happens to be. They hold on to philosophy and they just embrace the economics. I think at the end of the day, that is a losing strategy. I think at the end of the day, you're not going to change the world based on that. And you don't benefit in your own life from it. You become just a fighter for economics. But the whole point is to change your own life. So I think philosophy is much more important than economics, much more foundational, much more impactful in the individual's life. And I wish the Austrians would take Ayn Rand seriously. And they need to. They are losing because of it. We are all losing because of it. And I often say, imagine if Mises and Hayek and I don't know who else, and Friedman and some other great economists for 50 years ago had taken Ayn Rand seriously and promoted her as the philosopher of liberty. I mean, the world would be a completely different place today, completely different. So one of the great tragedies of the 20th century, one of the great tragedies of the 20th century is that significant, important intellectuals of the time did not take Ayn Rand seriously. And that needs to change. And hopefully some of these Austrian economists will change that.
So as we're talking about, all these difficulties in applying objectivism in one's own life or in another area like economics or psychology and so on, I think one of the, let's say, difficulties in spreading objectivism is that it's so difficult to teach it. And I think especially, a lot of people might think that they have a good grasp of objectivism, but as soon as someone asks them a question, especially a tough question like ARI intellectuals tend to ask, then you very quickly realize like you have a notion of what the answer is, but it's not, you don't really hold it as strong as one might think. So given that, what do you think are some of the, I know you're no longer the CEO of ARI, but you were for a while. Given that, so what do you think are some of the guidelines to trust someone to teach objectivism?
I mean, that's difficult, and we always struggle with that, and we always debate it internally, and it's not easy to figure that out. And one of the reasons why we've put so much emphasis on the OAC, in the past it was OGC, Objectivist Graduate Center, and it has been to try to train people ourselves and then get to know them really well, and then have them as teaching assistants for a while before you actually put them into the classroom and have them teach objectivism. So it has to be somebody who has a deep understanding of the ideas of the philosophy. It has to be somebody who is good at communicating, and that's not always the same. Communication is a whole other skill set. And verbal communication, you could be a great writer, but a terrible teacher. So you have to find the right people. And this is why, again, we're constantly trying to encourage people to join the OAC and to become part of it, particularly if you're an aspiring intellectual, particularly if you want one day to teach, particularly if you want one day to teach objectivism. You should join the OAC. You should get engaged with the intellectuals at the Institute. You should become part of what we're doing and what's going on, and allow us to get to know you and to get to know your skill set. The jobs are there. That is, we're always looking for teachers. We need more teachers, but how to find the right person? It's a matter of what they know and how well they are communicating it, and that takes a long time to prove to us that you actually can live up to that.
So just to try to get a little bit more specifics, when you say get to know them, what do you mean? You want to look at their dental records, or
Sure. I mean, if dental records could tell me something, I want to see them teach. I want to see them write. I want to see them think, or not see them think, but see them answering questions. I want them to be in situations where I can see how their mind works and how good they are at communicating the ideas. And I want to see them, I see the breadth and width of what they can do. So a variety of different topics, a variety of different questions, and a variety of different classes for them to teach. So I think it's a combination of all that. And of course, the best way to do that is to teach them. And of course, then they're in the position you are in the OAC, right? You get asked questions and you have to write, and writing is really, 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 really hard. And things you think you know until you write them out, you don't know that you don't know them. And suddenly you discover what you know and what you don't know. So I want them writing. I want to see what they wrote. I want to see where they're confused. I want to see if they can learn, if they can get better. If I give them the same writing assignment 2 months later, are they any better at it? Are they clearer thinkers? So all of that, it really is a process, and it's very concrete, right? I want to get to know them in an intellectual sense, right? In the sense of I want to get to know how their mind works. And that means seeing how they write, seeing how they teach, and seeing how they ask questions. Some people are very good at, they can figure out how to teach a class, but then as soon as you ask them a question, they fall apart. So I want to see how they think on their feet, which is what we refer to in terms of answering questions. And we train them to do that, and we help them to do that. So for example, I'm doing a bunch of seminars for the Institute right now on public speaking, right? So people on Zoom, they show up, they have a talk they're going to give, they give a talk for half an hour, and then I tell them what I think, both of the style and of the content. And then, hopefully 2 months later, they do it again, right? And that's it. So that's how you do it. And that's the objective criteria. The objective criteria is, can they present material in a convincing way as judged by people who know the material? So the objectivity of it is the fact that the people evaluating them are experts.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense. So as we're talking about, we got a little bit into the OAC and how it's a little bit of a numbers game that, you might get like 100 people who graduate, but maybe, 20 of them will go out and do like great things. And maybe one of them will
20 would be great. 20 out of every 100 would be fantastic. Right?
Yeah,
that would be an amazing number. 20% success rate. That's better than venture capitalists in Silicon Valley. And this is more speculative than venture capital in my view. 20% would be amazing.
Yeah, that's fair. I was pumping the numbers up a little bit for the.
Yeah, I mean, think about how many people get PhDs in the world out there. How many of those people do anything important in their lives in terms of influencing the world? They don't just regurgitate the same stuff that everybody else regurgitates. How many of them are original doing something new and something significant, a tiny fraction of 1%, right? So 20% is huge. If we can get 20% of every OEC class going on to do something important to spread the ideas, we win. Now, how do you get to 1,000? That's the question. So you can do the math, how many classes of 100 you have to graduate, where 20 each go out to do something. So you have to have 50 classes before you get to 1,000. And I think 1,000 is the game changer. So that's 50 years.
Yeah,
and that's my time horizon. I've always said it takes about 50 years to change the culture.
So my question is, I think you answered before I asked it. So what would you like the objectivist movement to look like in terms of like numbers of intellectuals and an influence and books published and so on?
Well, I think to change the world, we need about 1,000 people who are teaching, speaking, writing, and who are professional intellectuals and who are basically objectivists, applying it in a variety of different ways and to a variety of different topics. They need to be at newspapers. They need to be, well, the equivalent of newspapers today. They need to have Substacks. They need to have YouTube shows. They need to be in academia. They need to be at schools, at high schools, at universities. At whatever the mechanism is. You know, and they need to be people who know the philosophy inside out and can apply it inside out. You know, not everything, right? So you can't expect everybody to be to know everything about metaphysics or everything about philosophy or epistemology, but they need to know enough to be able to apply it effectively in their field of study, in their area. So you need about 1,000 people like that. Some of them will be Alex Epstein. Some of them will be Greg Salamiris or Tara Smith. Some of them will be me. Some of them will be Don Watkins. You know, you've got to, all of us are different and all of us do different things and engage in the world in different ways. But you need numbers because only a few of those thousands will be really, really, really prominent. And remember, you know, you said 100 of which 20, right? We've never had a class of 100. So you can't start counting 20 years ago or when the OEC started because there have been classes of 100. Only now are we getting to real big numbers and real big classes. So it's still true that it's about 50 years from now. Maybe it's 50 years from 5 years ago, 50 years from someone, but it's about 50 years from now. Hopefully it will get to the point where we have classes that are bigger than 100 and we can accelerate this and make it faster. But you need, and one of the things you need is, you know, I've talked about this in other circumstances. You need artists. You have to have artists. And they have to be artists who know the philosophy, have integrated it, but then don't create objectivist art because there is no such thing. They create art. They create good art. So they're really, really good at the art. They've gone and studied in Italy or whatever, and they really know what they're doing when it comes to producing art. But they have the sense of life and they have the values that are going to change, that are going to produce good art, both thematically and aesthetically. And then you need scientists. Leonard Peikoff talks about this in his dim hypothesis book. You need scientists, educators, and artists on top of the intellectuals, the philosophers, and everybody else. So you need scientists, and which means you need people who are actually doing things in science who credit their success in science to Ayn Rand. I mean, I think Harry Binswanger has said, imagine if somebody gets a Nobel Prize for physics and he's accepting the award and he attributes his success to Ayn Rand's epistemology. That would, in many ways, change the world, right? So you need scientists, educators. Educators, I think we're getting. Scientists, educators, artists, and intellectuals. Those are the four areas in which you need people. And of course, you know, there are going to be tens of thousands of people who've been inspired by Ayn Rand, who might not have studied it quite as deep, but who are then communicating these ideas at whatever level they can, whatever level they know to the rest of the public. And that slowly changes the world, changes the terms in which people think, and what I call softens the culture to these ideas. So the more people they are out there talking about these ideas, expressing these ideas, engaged in these ideas, the faster this happens.
So I mean, you brought up the dim hypothesis, and you brought up this 50-year number, right? Estimate. And if I remember correctly, that was around Leonard Peikoff's prediction, right? That in about 50 years.
Well, it was a prediction that he says in the book was inspired by me. He wanted to say there's no hope.
Oh, I see. I see.
And I convinced him that there was hope, and 50 years was, a good number.
Reasonable.
A good number.
Okay.
And neither of us will be alive to see if it turned out right or not.
Right. Yeah. So, I mean, you're talking about some of, let's say, these challenges in having objectivism be more influential in society and culture. And, there's a need for fundamentally more human resources, more intellectuals, more individuals thinking and applying these ideas. What do you think is, I mean, if you had a magic wand, I have a sense that Harry Binswanger would be upset at me asking a question like this because it's like fantasizing. But if you had a magic wand and you could just, change whatever you want to change in the world, or let me put it in financial terms. If you had like infinite money, right? You have like $1 billion, let's say. What do you think needs to happen to get to, let's say, this point of 1,000 intellectuals?
Well, I think if you had unlimited resources, the first thing that has to change is the educational system. So if I had $1 billion, I would invest heavily in changing the educational system, in trying to privatize it. So working politically to try to privatize education, and at the same time supporting schools with good curriculum. So supporting any objectivist entrepreneur who is willing to go out there and start a school and build curriculum and build maybe online educational tools that just improve the ability of young people to think. Because if they can think, then we should be able to capture them, right? If they can't think, then it's hopeless. So that would be the first thing. And then the second thing is I would just take whatever the Ayn Rand Institute is doing today and make it bigger, right? So take all the financial constraints away, basically whether it's marketing Atlas Shrugged to young people, trying to get teachers to teach it, trying to get free copies in the hands of people, making that global, not just in the US, but in Brazil, in Asia, in Europe, even in Africa. We're just about to send a bunch of books to Africa. There are people all over the world. So try to just scale that up as much as you can. Liberate a lot of the intellectuals out there. So whatever intellectuals we have who might be struggling financially in terms of making a living, so they can't just dedicate themselves just to objectivism and just spreading the world, buying them out in a sense, just saying, okay, here's the money, go just teach, just speak, just do YouTube, just whatever it is that you do, go out there and spread the ideas or whatever level you can. So basically using the resources to enhance, to increase the ability of the intellectuals to get to as many people as possible, and then to market the ideas as broadly and as widely as possible. The Institute has to be very focused right now, in both financially and because of time and resources. Take away the financial constraints, and I think amazing things can happen.
Well, we talked about the challenges to make the ideas more knowable, and we have about the OOC. So what do you think are the main things those in their 20s can do to contribute to the diffusion of Ayn Rand's ideas? I mean, it's a new generation. Many things change from our generation, from your generation. So what are the challenges ahead? What they can do to help spread the ideas?
Well, I think the best thing you could do is promote the ideas, get people to read the books, encourage people to read the books. Do what Ricardo's done, study at the OAC, whether you become an intellectual or not, you'll just have a better grasp of the ideas. You'll become a better communicator. Organize study groups, reading groups, organize events and bring out objectivist speakers to those events, encourage people to follow us on social media, share. I mean, one of the amazing things today is that there is so much content, right? I mean, you've got all of Leonard Peikoff's courses, you've got all of Ayn Rand's lectures, all available free online. Why aren't young people just sharing? I mean, they should be on Twitter every day. I should see somebody sharing something by Leonard Peikoff every single day, and I don't see it. People are reluctant to share this amazing content, and that's, I think, unfortunate. So you don't have to become an intellectual. What you can do is leverage the best intellectuals in the world for the cause you believe in by using their content. And because of social media and because of the internet, we can now, at a marginal cost of zero, just get these ideas out there into the world. So I really would like to see objectivists all over the world sharing Ayn Rand's talk, sharing Ayn Rand's articles, sharing Leonard Peikoff's lectures. And then when you finish doing all that, then you can start doing Tara Smith and Greg Salamiri, and there's a million other people, right? But you probably got a long time before you get through just the core material of Leonard Peikoff and Ayn Rand. There's so much good material. I mean, when I first discovered objectivism 40 years ago, there was almost no content. It was Atlas Shrugged and the things that Ayn Rand wrote, and that's it. There was no lectures by Leonard Peikoff yet. And if you got them in the 80s, you had to go to special clubs and pay a lot of money to listen to tapes, and it was impossible to learn anything. There was no resources, particularly if you lived overseas. Today, there's a million resources. And what saddens me is that people are not taking advantage of it. People are not engaging with that material. And it's a shame because it all exists out there and it's all accessible and it all needs to go out there. And exactly how to market it, each one of you can decide. But if everybody who is an objectivist, who calls himself an objectivist, started sharing one piece of objectivist literature a day, that would have a massive impact out there.
Just on a note on this, on the Ayn Rand campus courses, from Brazil, we are with Objetivismo Brasil, we are sharing one new course each 15 days, and we have at least 2,200 people signing in each 15 days, and more than 3,000 that were already impacted.
That's great.
So we are trying to get things out as much as we can in a coordinated way, because people cannot watch it all, but we have more than 100 hours subtitled. So if you have the chance and you don't know English pretty well, and you are Brazilian, you are watching this, you can contact us, you can access the platform, it's all there. So we are doing our best to get the idea out, and let's hope we have a bigger impact. We have daily articles. We have more than 1,000 articles, more than 1,000 videos daily on our YouTube channel as well. So it's really an ongoing effort, and it's really nice to see people getting to know the ideas and having an impact.
Absolutely, I agree completely. And Brazil is being particularly open to this, and really done a good job. You guys have done a good job promoting these ideas. Ayn Rand goes back in Brazil to organized around Ayn Rand, go back in Brazil to the early 80s and in Porto Alegre. And there's been a kind of an objectivist movement, if you will, or influence of objectivism in Brazil for now 40 years. And it's great. It's great to see it growing. It's great to see it sustained. So great job you guys are doing. And there's a lot of content now available in Portuguese. There's a lot of content in Spanish. Those are probably the two languages outside of English where there's the most content. And there's a lot of upside, I think, as a consequence of play in Latin America.
So, Yaron, as you were talking about the volume, the amount of content that there is available nowadays. I mean, I've kind of done the math on just what's available, just counting the books and the courses. I mean, that easily reaches about 1,000 hours of studying time, like very, very easily.
Oh,
so
easily.
just
Should be
going
easy.
through it once is
Yeah.
1,000 hours.
Yeah.
So when you add up, let's say, the thinking with other people, let's say reading groups and
Yeah.
discussion groups and so on, that can very easily go into a few thousands of hours of studying. And that doesn't equate to mastery. That equates to a decent grasp of the ideas. So my question is, on motivation, what do you think is let's say, the connection between discipline, which is broadly called self-discipline, and motivation? Because a lot of people, you probably hear this a lot, they say, oh, I love Ayn Rand, I really like her ideas. But then the bottom line is, well, can you just sit down for a few hundreds of hours across a few months or a few years and just read the stuff,
I mean, I think it's all about motivation at the end of the day. I think if you're properly motivated and you understand the value of what you're going to get, then I think the discipline will come. Certainly, we live in a culture of short attention spans, of people not used to studying. They think they can listen to a video on YouTube for 20 minutes and they know everything there is to know about a particular topic, the masters of the universe. But but that's changing. Look at Lex Friedman. Lex Friedman does these 4-hour interviews and people listen to them. So I think if people are motivated and see the value that they will receive from spending 1,000 hours studying, I think they will do it. But it's hard to convince them, and then it's hard for them to grasp the value of philosophy in their lives. It's a real challenge for people to kind of realize how important this is in their own life. Very few people land up doing it because of that.
Right. So on this note of studying, now just to ask a question on Ayn Rand, I've seen many of the interviews of people who knew her, especially like in the 50s and 60s, and she would help out people when they were taking their PhDs and clarifying what a particular philosopher said and so on. So do you happen to know what her studying routine was like, especially in terms of like studying other philosophers?
Yeah, I really don't. I mean, you'd have to ask somebody who has studied her life more, but I don't know.
Do you know who does, so I can reach out to them?
Well, certainly Harry Binswanger would be a good source. He might know, he'd know more than I do. I mean, Harry was there in some respect, at least for some years. I wasn't. So, I mean, he might know. You might want to ask Jeff Britting at the Ayn Rand Archives, who has studied her life and has the archival evidence of her life. He might know, but I have no idea.
Right. So, all right. I guess we got to a question that Yaron Brook doesn't know the answer to.
That's right. That's very unusual. That's very.
We get extra points for that. But let me end on my last question is perhaps more on a positive note. So I mean, you were the CEO of ARI for about 17 years or so.
Yep.
So could you tell us what do you think were, in trying to like create this objectivist world, let's say, or having this impact, have objectivism have a bigger impact in the culture? What do you think were some of the main highlights or your main accomplishments as ARI CEO?
I mean, I'd say getting Ayn Rand's books read more, in dramatically more. So book sales increased dramatically while I was CEO. I mean, they went up and down over time, but generally the trend was dramatically higher. Particularly I initiated the books to high school students, what we call the Free Books to Teachers program, which saw hundreds of thousands of books distributed to high school teachers. And they taught them to high schools the fact that the essay contest during those years was the largest in the world, over 20,000 essays. So that's on one sense, just book sales and getting the books into the hands of kids was hugely significant. And then the other was the formalization and the growth of the OEC, making it into a formal program, making it into an ambitious program. It's gone through a lot of different phases and a lot of different types, but we've always pushed that. And then third, I'd say, is this idea of having objectivist intellectuals out there in the world, and that the Institute could play a role both in training them, but also in supporting them and hiring them and helping promote their work and getting them out there. I mean, Alex Epstein, again, I'll refer to him, worked at the Institute for 5 or 7 years before he went out on his own and did what he did. And, you know, the idea that the Institute could be a source of those intellectuals, that they could help train them and then support them and then encourage them. I think all of those are some of the achievements that we achieved during those 17 years. And look, the Institute grew dramatically. The amount of money coming into the Institute grew dramatically. And the amount of people engaged in our programs grew dramatically during those 17 years. People forget how small the Institute was in 2000 when I took over.
Right.
And of course, the fourth thing would be international. The Institute was very much US focused until, I don't know, 2007, 8, somewhere around there, where we started becoming more international and looking. And, you know, as a consequence, we become much more active all over the world.
Yeah, I mean, and on this international aspect, I think you'd be glad to know that now the Ayn Rand Center Latin America is doing essay contests.
Yes.
Both in Spanish and Portuguese. So
yeah, no, it's terrific. And again, Spanish and Portuguese are probably the two biggest languages for objectivism to expand into. You know, we're not going to make much progress in French or in German, I feel. Yeah. But Spanish and Portuguese, there's a lot of upside.
Yeah. So do you have any last comments, any last remarks you want to add?
I just say I'm looking forward to visiting you guys in September. I'll be in Brazil and in other parts of Latin America in September so I'm hoping we do a bunch of different events, and I get to meet a lot of the people who listen to your show and who participate in the seminars you guys organize. I don't know if I'll make it out to Porto Alegre, but I'll certainly be in Sao Paulo and maybe other places. And generally, as I think I've expressed in the past, I love Brazil. I find the people engaging and really positive. I've always had positive experiences there, and I'm looking forward to visiting again and visiting often and helping have a real impact on Brazilian culture.
Well, thanks, Yaron, for being with us today. So for all Brazilian speakers, starting tomorrow, we're going to be working on the simultaneous interpreting of this interview. So you're going to be able to listen to it in Portuguese. And also you can check our playlist where we are interviewing intellectuals, objectivist intellectuals from all over the world. We had Mark Moses, we had Don Watkins, Robert Garmon, now Yaron, and much more to come. So thanks again, Yaron, and thanks for everybody who had the chance to watch us.
Thank you, and thanks everybody.
Bye-bye.
Bye. See you in Brazil.
See you.